Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Core from the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division within the Office of Special Education Programs. I want to thank you for joining us for what I think is going to be a very interesting presentation. We have representatives from a variety of different offices and organizations here, which I think will give us different vantage points into the whole world of correctional education. In addition to folks from OSEP, we also will have folks from some of the other principal offices within the Department of Education. We will have representatives from the U.S. Department of Justice. We also will have some presentations from a couple of our OSEP-funded TA centers, and then from two of our, actually from two states, colleagues from two states, Pennsylvania and Michigan. And then last but not least, we will have representatives from an advocacy agency, the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. So each of these folks will be introducing themselves as they come on. This presentation will address collaboration, trends, challenges, and successes in correctional education settings over the last 2 years. As I said, you'll hear from OSEP as well as federal, state, and TA partners. Each partner will share information as well as resources to support improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities who are in correctional settings. OSEP recognizes that it can be challenging for correctional facilities to align with and comply with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. We hope the information presented today helps improve correctional education for students with disabilities, ensuring that all students have equal access to public education in correctional facilities is critical, whether students are in juvenile justice facilities or state adult facilities. I want to especially acknowledge Curtis Kennard and Heather Olson, our two correctional education leads within the Office of Special Education Program, for all the work that they've done to prepare for and pull together this presentation. We have allotted 90 minutes for the presentation. The last 10 minutes we will try to reserve for your questions. During today's Q&A session, you may also input your questions into the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. And then we will follow up with your response. The last slide of the presentation includes a list of resources that you may find helpful. And because there's so much information here, I want to especially highlight that the presentation, the PowerPoint from the presentation, will be available in the OSEP monthly national calls link that's located in the chat. So we have quite a few presenters. I'm not going to take up any more of the time, but turn over today's presentation to Curtis Kennard from OSEP. Curtis.
Curtis, you're on mute.
We're happy and excited to be here. Just thank you so much for being able to participate today and taking a lot of time out of your schedule. And without hesitation, Heather and I would take probably about 15 minutes just to do some quick reminders. We know over the years that we have new state directors. And so we just take those few minutes to do a reminder, then we'll move on with collaborative partners. Next slide, please. As you see on this particular side, you can see the correction ed partners with OSEP all the way down to the State Department of Justice and Coalition of Justice. Next slide, please. We have the agenda. As you can see at the end of the agenda there, we have the question and answers session. Hopefully we have about 10 minutes for you to do that. As Greg mentioned before, just take a second or two and see, just take a view for the collaborative problems that's there. Next slide, please. Purpose. As you know, anybody at OSEP know, over the years I've been working with correction here, and I'm very excited and very passionate about correction here, being previous to workers, especially at teaching, administrating, and correction facility, understand the issues that students have and their needs. And with that being said, a purpose for this presentation is to look at the collaborative activities that we have within correction education and that support juvenile justice, and also address challenges, trends, and successes. Next slide, please. Okay, Individual with Disabilities Act. As you can see the information here. I want to point you to the link. So you get an opportunity when it's posted on the IDA website on the MSEP, what Greg had mentioned previously. Please go to that link and look at all the information around the IDA. I just highlighted on this slide just a few bullet points. And you see this really, really important. You look at bullet point 1. The emphasis is really on special education related services. So please ensure, as being a state LEA or anyone providing service for students with disability, whether they're in the public school setting or in the juvenile justice setting, it's important that those services are provided. The next bullet emphasizes the rights of children and parents, and that's really critical in the special education field, especially in correctional facilities. Sometimes when students leave the school district, we kind of like out of mind, but what applies in the school district also applies in this facility. The next bullet point down there shows the responsibility that the states have in the local localities in providing special education services. But on this last bullet, you see education of parents. Oh, that's really critical for the tools to be provided for educators and parents, and being able to parents understanding what their rights are, what's available. So it's imperative for educators, whether in the facility or whether in the school system, is communicate to parents, communicate tools where parents be involved. We know by research that when parents are involved, students do better. Next slide, please. Oh, this one, collaboration and coordinate. It is so, so important to collaborate. One thing I would say, collaborate, as we know in OSEP and the correction ed, working in this field, no one agency, no one person can do it. It takes a whole village, and it takes really collaboration to make it work throughout the system. And with that being said, there's a couple of highlights here. One advantage of collaboration and coordination is for free and appropriate public education for students with disabilities, especially students that are mobile. This can be students with disability. It can be students without disabilities, providing educational services. And we know that the faith applies to students with disability. But what's important, I want to emphasize also in appropriate. The appropriate education is really key, and keep that in mind, appropriate, not just what's available, but appropriate. Okay, another important part of collaboration is communication. Communicate, critical to communicate with each other, especially in the entry process. That is so critical, providing records, educational programming. So what am I saying? That means that the facility, the school district, and educators and all that involved, parole officers and all, need to be speaking to each other, whether it's at the state level, federal level, or even in a non-educational environment. Also, what we're looking at, what would be productive? In an alternative environment, you have dual enrollment, high school and college programs can be really essential, and vocational education is really essential. It's important to collaborate there. What else in collaboration we're looking at? We're looking at the flexibility and reliability of funds. For example, You may have a state SEA delegate the authority to the correction facility or delegate it to the Department of Correction or whatever other agency as a collaborative partner delegated to that partner. So it's important to look at the funding. What else is important that can be done? Joint monitoring can be done, development of different activities and webinars, working together, whether it's in the state, whether it's in the federal government, whether it's in the private sector. Next, the last bullet, strengthening collaboration. What can we do there? Communicate with the community organization. Important that the parole officers, probation officers, social service agencies is involved in the process and involved in the collaborative process. What else is critical here? I must say is interagency agreements. And in IDA, we have 300-154. It talks about interagency agreement. If you haven't looked at that, please go to the Dear Colleague letter and look at 300-154. It doesn't give you everything, but it gives you a starting point to collaborate with interagency agreement. We'll talk more about that maybe later. If not, then please email Heather and I, and we can give you additional information. Next slide, please. Oh, this one, correction, education, and concern. As we look over this few years through research, to best practices, and through just calls into OSEP. Now, in this particular slide, I just listed, Heather and I, we listed just a few bullet points here under three categories: entry, resident or residential, and re-entry. As you can see, what's so important, the first bullet there is transfer of records from the school system to the facility, critical. Some type of agreement in place for message of services, family involvement during the transition. That means from the school through the court system to the juvenile justice system while they're in the juvenile justice system and exiting the juvenile justice system. So critical for parents to be involved. What else is critical? Child find, critical. A school facility, was the facility as its only LEA, was the facility as a part of a school district, whether it's non-education facility or private, need to have child find policies in place. Why am I saying that? What's the reason behind it is that, for example, the school system could have missed the child as he or she moved through the system. Well, one thing having in place a child find policy within the facility that actually would capture through doing a proper intake procedure and assessment. The next area is resident or residential. What's critical there? Educational program is so critical. Back in 2016, OCR, when in 2016-17, OSEP had correction ed as a focus area. And one of the things that we looked at, it was OCR program, educational programming definition. We do have a definition of that in the back of the presentation. And if you have time, please look at that. If not, you can reach out to Heather and myself. But what else happened in residential? Timely implementation of IEP goals, so critical. Under IDA, you have so many days to implement the IEP. What else is critical under educational programming? Providing educational programming that will help provide credit towards high school graduation. What can be so frustrating to students is to go through a program in the facility, do everything right, exit the facility, come back to the home school, and find out they didn't get any credits or the credits come late. So we have an obligation as educators, myself and all, to make sure we do due diligence. What else is important? Transitional services, so critical around education, training, and employment, independent living. Ensure that those things in the IEP, ensure that your facility administrators and teachers is aware of all these things. And if you're not sure, we have the Dear Colleague letter in the self-assessment that Heather will talk about later on. What next in addition to residential? parental involvement on the biological, was the biological parent or the surrogate parent, really critical in tracking information, etc. Let me move, I mentioned NIH agreement. Let's go to reentry. What's so critical here in reentry? It really is advisable through best practices and just in general for facilities to have policies and procedures for recording transcript records and exiting the facility. What procedure do you have in place when a student is exiting the facility? Real critical to think about, because one of the things we don't want to happen is the student leave the facility, the school is not notified, not of the services, not of the probation office, and the school is left in this black hole for about 3 weeks. The student left in the hole for about 3 weeks. No one knows where she is. And all of a sudden, we lost 2 and 3 weeks or even a month of education. So this is so critical. And I would just sum it up. Communication, collaboration is key in the whole process. Next slide, please. Now I turn it over to my colleague, Helen Oates.
Regarding the provision of services under IDEA Part B, the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, has developed and issued a question and answer document which specifically addresses the implementation of IDEA Part B during COVID. This information does apply to students with disabilities who are incarcerated. This document can be found through the link on this slide and also in the chat. It's important to remember, it's crucial to remember, no matter what primary instructional delivery approach is chosen, state education agencies, local education agencies, and IEP teams remain responsible for ensuring FAPE is provided to all children with disabilities. If state and local decisions require schools to limit or not provide in-person instruction due to health and safety concerns, SEA, LEAs, and IEP teams are not relieved of their obligation to provide FAPE to each child with a disability under IDEA. Additional guidance can be found at the links provided to the Department of Education topic areas and those with the CDC as well. Next slide, please. To assist state education agencies or SEAs in reflecting and assessing their systems for providing a free and appropriate education to students with disabilities in correctional facilities, OSEP has developed the State Correctional Education Self-Assessment Tool. It is a voluntary tool which is organized into 3 main areas: interagency agreements, evaluating and tracking states' progress for implementation of IDEA, Part B for students with disabilities who are incarcerated, and evaluation and tracking of how IDEA requirements are being addressed by public agencies. This tool can be used to support monitoring activities and implementation of Part B requirements at state and local levels. Next slide, please. In 2014, a Dear Colleague letter was issued to clarify state and public agency obligations under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, to ensure the provision of a free and appropriate public education to eligible students with disabilities in correctional facilities. Some key points to take away from the Dear Colleague letter are: there is a shared responsibility to provide FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. The state education agency has responsibility. There are personnel qualifications. Interagency coordination is very important. Child find and evaluation are required. FAPE is required in the least restrictive environment possible for students who are incarcerated. Review of the components of the Dear Colleague letter and outcomes from the completion of the State Correctional Education Self-Assessment Tool can provide valuable information on how IDEA is being implemented with incarcerated students, as well as guidance for correction in identified areas of concern. Both the Dear Colleague Letter and the State Correctional Education Self-Assessment Tool can be found in the link below, and the link is also included in the chat. Next slide, please. The Research to Practice Division of OSEP offers several resources regarding correctional education. Some of the resources include professional development models through the IRIS Technical Assistance Center. These modules have been designed especially for educational professionals working in correctional settings and can be very valuable. Parental resources. OSEP Center for Parental Information and Resources has developed resources for professionals working with parents of juvenile justice involved students who have disabilities. The Juvenile Justice Toolkit is another valuable resource provided by Research to Practice Division. Contact information for the co-program officer and links to the resources are provided in this slide and in the chat. Next slide, please. Rehabilitation Administration Services is one of the internal partners working with OSEP on correctional education. Tara and April are contacts for grant and our grant analysts working within the Division of Rehabilitation Administration Resources. Next slide, please. The Rehabilitation Services Administration, the RSA, provides leadership and resources to assist state and other agencies in providing vocational rehabilitation and other services to individuals with disabilities to maximize their employment, independence, and integration into the community and competitive labor market. RSA is a component of the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, OSERS, within the U.S. Department of Education. The mission of OSERS is to improve early childhood educational and employment outcomes. It is also to raise expectations for all people with disabilities, their families, their communities, and the nation. OSER's vision is that all Americans with disabilities will live and thrive with their disabilities within their own communities. And next, we'll hear from Deanna, who will be speaking about the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the collaborative.
Hello. If you go on to the next slide, please. Hi, I'm Deanne Unruh from the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition and the Collaborative. This is a co-funded or equally co-funded center from the Office of Special Education Programs and Rehab Services Administration. And we're just ending our second year of 5 years of funding. And so what our charge is to really provide information, tools, and supports to assist multiple stakeholders, but primarily state agency personnel in the state departments of education and vocational rehabilitation, and delivering effective services and instruction for secondary students and out-of-school youth with disabilities. And so we work with state departments to build their state agency capacity to use data-driven decision-making procedures, strengthen interagency partnerships, provide quality professional development so that all students and youth with disabilities experience increased enrollment in post-secondary education, graduation, credential attainment, competitive integrated employment, and community engagement. Well, we have 13 objectives in which we provide technical assistance to our state partners with, one of which is to ensure that students and youth who come from marginalized populations, specifically youth with disabilities involved in juvenile services, receive equitable and access to effective and evidence-based transition services. And as we know that many of those youth with disabilities in juvenile services also intersect a lot of other marginalized populations, including poverty and others. And so the rest of my presentation will just focus in on supports for around correctional education, but please visit our website at transitionpa.org for a plethora of other resources and tools and access to our technical assistance surrounding all things transition. Next slide, please. So at the request of OSERS, NTAC-C developed a survey to identify current services and needs of correctional education, specifically after the COVID pandemic. And so we administered the survey between December of 2021 through March of this year. The survey was sent to identified state correctional education leads, and if no one was identified, it was sent to the state special education transition lead or the state director of special education. In all, we received only 48 respondents representing 35 states, jurisdictions, and territories. So please keep that in mind when you view the data that I'll be presenting shortly for that. And it included representatives or respondents from both juvenile and adult correctional education personnel. And I'm only going to show you two pieces of data points from this, but go ahead and go on to the next slide. And so one of our questions was asked the respondents if they were familiar with OSEP's correctional education self-assessment, this assessment that Heather had just talked about. And as you can see, only half of the respondents were actually familiar with this self-assessment of the 45 people who responded for that. Next slide. And so of those who said yes, which were 22, we asked if your state had completed the self-assessment. And so only 22%, which would be 5 states, actually have completed it. 1 state's partially completed it. But what we found interesting as a technical assistance center and also identified a gap for how we can fill this need is that almost more than half of the states or the respondents did not know if their self-assessment had been completed at all. So we have used this information and other information from the survey to help drive our technical assistance that we'll be providing in the future. One of the things is that this fall we'll be launching a community of practice for correctional education state agency personnel across both special education and vocational rehabilitation to provide a platform for them to share challenges, answer questions, share about their innovative practices that may be happening so states can learn from each other. We also will be having a webinar series that will be happening early next year that will focus in on states and how they are improving their correctional education services and how they provide interagency collaboration across the state special education and vocational rehabilitation. We also have started working intensively with one state who actually is on the call list today to support their reentry services across the state for that. We also have implemented, we'll be working with our colleagues at Title I Part D and DTACT, who is coming up shortly, just to share information for states we're working with so we don't duplicate, but we can also leverage our technical assistance within DTACT. And with that, I will turn this over to my Title I Part D colleague. Jeffrey, you're on.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Bueller, Education Program Specialist at the Department of Ed, part of the Teachers, Leaders, and Special Populations team. I am a program officer who is focused on Title I Part D full-time. And if you're not familiar with Title I Part D, that's okay. We have a link to the office website there in the chat box. But Title I Part D, in essence, is to ensure the education of neglected, delinquent, and at-risk youth, right? And we see this, this plays out a couple different ways. First of all, there's our state agencies out there, whether they be youth correctional facilities or adult correctional facilities that also house youth. Those are we call it Subpart 1 that addresses the state agencies for youth who are post-adjudication and in residential facilities. But we also have Subpart 2, which works with local education agencies to get those youth before adjudication or those at-risk youth and hopefully keep them out of the system. So a lot of different things, a lot of different ways that plays out at the local level with Subpart 2 of Title I Part D. You see my information there. You're welcome to email me at any time, but we also put in the chat box our Title I Part D mailbox. So no matter where you are in the country, whatever state, if you just want to reach out to that, Title I-D@ed.gov email, that's a email address that everyone on the team sees. We get them all, and then we will connect you with someone in your state or locally to you. If you want to find out more about Title I in your area or how you can connect and collaborate. That email address, we're always checking, so hit us up anytime with that. I'm excited to introduce you to one of our partners, Mary Chone, who's going to jump on now and tell you about her role as a contractor in support of this program and tell you a little bit more about how we collaborate.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Jeff. My name is Mary Chown, and I am the transitioning Deputy Director of NDTAC. I'm also the Senior Grants Management Analyst at Longevity, which is the federal contractor that hosts the NDTAC National Assistance Center for the Education of Neglected or Delinquent Children and Youth, or NDTAC, which is easier to say. The Department of Ed, Jeff, and all of the program officers there, and NDTAC work very, very closely together to make sure that our efforts and all of our initiatives are in alignment with each other and with the states. Next slide, please. The mission of NDTAC is to improve educational programming for youth who are considered to be neglected, delinquent, or at risk of academic failure. Our mandates are to provide information, resources, and direct technical assistance to states. We assist states and providers with reporting data and evaluating their services. We serve as a facilitator to increase information sharing and peer-to-peer learning at state and local levels. For additional information, you can visit our center's website or contact us at ndtac@longevityconsulting.com. Next slide, please.
Well, it's really clear to both us at Ed and NDTAC, with such a sophisticated program like Title I Part D, where we have state agencies and local agencies, us at the national level we realize that the key to success, any success that we're going to have, is at the state level and the state coordinators that we get to work with. So our program staff works with NDTAC to really try to figure out ways to support the state coordinators of the Title I Part D program, and all the other type of programs you see here listed in the third program, a third bullet, whether it be 21st century, education for homeless youth, education for youth with special needs. We realize that we work with a lot of the same populations. So at the national level, we realize it's up to the states. They know best. They know what's going on with the state agencies and the local agencies and all the complicated or sophisticated relationships there and partnerships there. So we really try to build on what the states know, what the states tell us that they need, what the states have learned, what can we take from what they've learned and share with other states. So as you see, our keys to collaboration, it's really how do we come together to support the state education agencies. And again, trying to bring in, build on different expertise and support programs in that way. Next slide, please. As if you've ever probably knows out there, every state is so different. I always say with keys to working with the states, but yet every state is so different. Most states have subpart 1 and subpart 2, but some of the smaller ones only have subpart 1. And then also, different state agencies, the different structures there, the different justice systems within the state, and of course, all the local education agencies and the partnerships that happen there. So we know that there's a variety of experiences, a variety of challenges out there. We are really committed to learning as much as we can about what the states are going through, what the state agencies are going through, what the local agencies are going through, so we can take the federal law and support them in the ways that they work within those mandates. We've really focused on trying to build up open communications between states, facilities, families. We've been really actively trying to build communities of practice. Again, we're not the expert. The states are really the experts in how to get this done. So we're trying to bring the different states together in a couple of variety of ways so that not only can we share with them, but they can share with each other. Those type of collaborations across states and across agencies, I think, were vital during the heat of the pandemic, when people had to figure things out at the local level there. All right, next slide. To accomplish our goals and support the states the best way we can, we have a few new things cooking at Title I Part D. So under the things being done well, these are the things that we're excited about in the upcoming fiscal year, or the current fiscal year and beyond. First of all, we're restarting our monitoring efforts. We haven't monitored since the pandemic. So we're really curious to see, how much things have changed, right? We're going to get into some of the data in a minute, but really learning what's happening on the ground, what's happening at the state level, what's happening at these state agencies. Big part of that is monitoring. How can we get out to the states, find out what's going on, find out the different parts of their program, subpart 1, subpart 2, what's working well, where do they need the supports. And we're launching a new monitoring process based on the best practices of other programs. We're starting with 3 states this fiscal year, and then we'll be revising and developing something super responsive to the state education agency needs. We're also working on improving the data collection. As you can imagine, with populations that move in and out of facilities, data collection is a huge challenge for Title I Part D. So we're looking at ways that we can revise data collection, whether through EdFacts or CSPR, to really improve, the accuracy and the consistency on data. And how can we find out if our results are being successful? When the students move out, how can we keep track of, our education efforts, and did they help them transition to a successful work in life? We're also trying to look through our different forms of guidance, whether ESSA guidance, uniform grant guidance. But with our program, there might be some gaps. So we're really looking at revisions to our non-regulatory guidance to make sure there's no gaps in the support or the direction for states and local subgrantees to follow. And really, it's about customer service, right? Build it. How can we work with the states? How can we increase their capacity to support their local programs? All right, next slide.
So what is being done well at NDTAC? Our T1PD state coordinators are engaged with multi-level supports. This includes, as Jeff mentioned, the communities of practice, where we have smaller groups of states arranged with a TA provider or TA facilitator, so that states can exchange ideas and information around topics that are presented throughout the year. We also have open office hours, which anyone can join on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So you can check those out on our website as to when they're being offered. We have intensive training and technical assistance that's just been piloted with 1 state this year. That's a multi-tiered level system of support model, and intensive training and technical assistance, which we call ITTA, is that 3rd level of support, where we work and walk hand in hand with the states to provide intensive technical assistance on major issues or major restructuring, providing professional development, and working on large trainings and large challenges within the state. We provide our website and resources. There's over 3,000 resources on the NDTAC website. We have a TA center and help desk that you can call or email anytime. We have webinars and an annual conference, and we provide new coordinator orientations for all new coordinators that are sitting in their seat, and they're fresh and new, and they need lots of support and lots of help to get up to speed. And we call these our NCOs. We additionally have resources, tip sheets, and all kinds of collaborative listings and more on our website. Please visit our website. Next slide, please.
All right, we wanted to share some current trends that we've been seeing in the neglected and delinquent education world. But we want to do so with a caveat. We're going to share some trends, but we're not really sure what's causing them, right? We have some ideas, but it's going to take getting out there. It's going to take hearing more from the states and looking at state by state comparisons, because again, every state's different. Nationally, we've seen an array of successful criminal justice reforms, whether from adults on down. So we know that that's a backdrop. There's a lot of changes happening to the criminal justice system, as you well know. One of the statistics that's jumping out to us for sure is that incarceration rates of youth is dropping. Now, we know, and I'll show you the numbers here in a minute, but we don't know exactly why are they dropping. Are they dropping because of, different legislation, different policies like the Family First Act, which works to keep kids, in the families longer, and that is the best way to support that. Some states are telling us that's what they see, but we're also hearing that, we don't know the full effect of COVID and the closures, right? Are they shutting down? Why are the numbers dropping just because facilities are closing or they can't support those youth? And so we're trying to find out what's going on with all of that. But it does seem like there's a apparent trend of, increased diversions, which means youth are detained less. But again, that's what part of what our data analysis and we'll be working at as we work with the states. We know that mental health, mental wellness has been a hot topic for all children, youth, families, teachers, everyone. But for these populations, for youth who are neglected, delinquent, at risk, those have different types of mental health issues that go. So we're really looking at the student population served by Title I Part D, trying to figure out how can we incorporate some of the mental health initiatives and mental wellness initiatives to support youth in those ways also. Next slide will show you the statistics that I was talking about. We have a few years of a comparison. Next slide. So you can see over the past 3 fiscal years, you can see the numbers dropping from 17, 18 all the way down to 20 as a nation. Students served by at-risk programs. Again, that's another one. We're going to talk about some of our challenges in terms of identifying youth who are at risk before they get into the juvenile justice system. States take individual approaches to that. But you can see the numbers going down, right? They're for sure going down. Part of what we're working to discover at the department and with our partners at IndyTech, and hopefully with any other programs out there, since we serve so many of the same populations, hopefully together we can figure out what's going on. Right? Next slide, please.
Sorry, NDTAC's FastFact web pages present this national and state longitudinal data, and it includes 3 concurrent school years. The data is on funding, program types, and student demographics for children and youth who are neglected, delinquent, or at risk, and enrolled in Title I Part D Subpart 1 and or Subpart 2 programs. The link should be posted in the chat for you for our FastFacts. New this year, NDTAC has recently implemented a data explorer that's available on our website. This interactive tool provides access to data visualizations with user-enabled filters for displaying Title I Part D data, and also includes 5 years of historical data. So the difference between our Fast Facts web pages, that's 3 concurrent school years that are available for you to view different information about the program. But the Data Explorer allows you to set filters and to explore the data in your own way. And it includes 5 years. Please put the Data Explorer in the chat. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Okay, we'll end here with some challenges as we move forward, but we'll do so with the hope that these collaborations, these partnerships with those who serve children with special needs, those who serve youth that are experiencing homelessness, and all the other at-risk factors, we're hopeful that together we can help overcome some of these challenges. One that we constantly face at the program level is, that the legislation is clear and we're kind of limited based on how we can support them. So always working with the states to make sure that what's happening at the state level and local levels are consistent with the legislation, something we're doing. Limitations on data collection, both at the state and sub-grantee levels. Already talked about, the transit population. They're only there short amounts of time. Whether they're at the pre-adjudication, they're often moving, and then post-adjudication, and when they're released, then what do we know happens? So there's a lot of limitations on data collection. We're trying to figure out ways that we can, overcome those challenges, find out ways to best support the youth, and determine if our program's being effectively at meeting the needs. The student population's needs are so complex, whether talk about youth with disabilities, youth experiencing homelessness, English language learners, youth in the foster care system. Fortunately, at the federal level, all those programs are together under teachers, leaders, and special populations. But we're constantly working across our program teams to try to bridge those gaps, and then hopefully we can help translate that at the local level. The program itself has not seen any increased funding for several years. It's been level funded for several years. So that means we do have less resources and less support for grantees, but hopefully we're being more efficient and strategic in that and try to counterbalance that. And we know that during COVID, stress and burnout was, messed with every part of our society, and teachers. We know teachers across every level are seeing teacher shortages. So teaching and staff shortages, it's in these neglected and delinquent facilities. They're experiencing the same shortages, right? Like burnout, stress, people not coming back after COVID. So that's our last one. And so I'll bid you adieu, and I'll pass it to Mary to talk about the last one. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm sorry, can you back up the slide?
We had one more challenge, yeah.
I'm sorry. So at NDTAC, we've seen a ton of Title I Part D state coordinator turnover, and that's a huge challenge for states when someone has already been in their seat and been effective in implementing the program, and then there's turnover. COVID affected some of that turnover, but there is a large turnover within this program for state coordinators. So NDTAC tries to maneuver or help this challenge by providing new coordinator orientations, the webinars and resources and small group discussions on topic levels that are relevant to new and to all state coordinators. We recently did a webinar on health and wellness and on transition planning to assist with this challenge. And now I'd like to turn it over to Emily Keller from the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Emily Keller, and I'm an attorney in the Special Litigation section of the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. And next slide, please. The Civil Rights Division works to ensure that the civil rights of children in correctional facilities are protected, including their rights under the IDEA. We have the authority to investigate facilities and seek remedies when there's a pattern or practice of constitutional violations or federal statutory violations. And what that means in this context is that We can investigate systemic concerns with respect to facilities provision of special education services. And when we find violations of the IDEA, we work to address them, often by entering settlement agreements with jurisdictions and facilities. We've investigated juvenile facilities and adult facilities, short-term detention centers, and longer-term placements. And today I just want to share some of the common concerns we see in the course of our investigations. So starting with child find, an earlier slide already highlighted some of the challenges with respect to intake and getting records and conducting child find at intake. We also see that facilities often lack policies and protocols with respect to child find once the child is in the classroom after intake. When children are struggling academically or behaviorally, some facilities lack practices and protocols to consider whether or not there should be interventions considered or referrals for special education evaluations. Next slide, please. We see a variety of concerns with respect to FAPE. One is obtaining the child's IEP from their school district. Obviously, if the facility school doesn't have that IEP or there are delays in obtaining it, they can't implement it. But even when the facility receives the IEP from the school district, we see in some facilities there are kind of standardized reductions in special education and related services. And at times they're kind of across the board cuts in services that seem more related to the needs of the facility rather than an assessment of the individual needs of the child. We see concerns with implementations of IEPs in the classroom. And I think there are a variety of reasons for this. Sometimes it's lack of training, lack of support, lack of access to special education teachers, and sometimes it's just the classroom teacher's lack of familiarity with the IEPs, that there aren't protocols in place such that the classroom teacher actually receives and reviews the IEPs, especially in facilities where kids are transitioning in and out for short periods of time. With respect to related services, children may receive reduced services or no services at all, especially if the facility lacks consistent access to related service providers. I wanted to touch on isolation and lockdown. So we often see concerns that when children are in isolation or units or the facility goes on lockdown, education services sometimes stop altogether. But sometimes it's replaced with a workbook or a packet that's sent to this child's cell, and there's not always a consideration of whether or not that workbook or the work packet that's being sent to the child is really tailored to their individual needs where they have an IEP. With respect to reliance on computer-based or packet-based instruction rather than teacher-led instruction, again, this is sometimes an educational method that is imposed across the board at facilities where the primary method of instruction is packets and computers, and the teacher is available maybe to assist with logging on and to answer questions, but they aren't actually leading the instruction. And again, this isn't always, there's not always a consideration of whether or not that instructional method comports with children's IEPs. And some kids, for example, may not be able to access it because of their reading level or may need support or interventions to stay on task and completing their work. Next slide, please. With respect to behavioral supports and response, we often see lack of functional behavioral assessments or behavioral intervention plans, even in situations where a child's behavior seems tied to their disability and impacts their learning. Often we'll see that the response to that behavior is discipline or exclusion from the classroom rather than the consideration of whether or not the child may need additional supports. We frequently see that facility schools fail to conduct manifestation determinations when kids are frequently excluded based on their classroom behavior. In lots of facilities, even though the teachers may be the ones that are filing the discipline reports or incident reports, it's the facility staff that determine the consequences. So there may be an incident at school and the facility staff will be the ones that determine that the child can't return for the day or is in isolation and doesn't get educational services. And there's sometimes a disconnect where, as a result, even when there are frequent exclusions, there aren't manifestation determinations. And finally, I will quickly touch on transition services. This was also mentioned on a previous slide. But this is an area, again, where we often see boilerplate transition plans in facilities rather than plans that are really tailored to a kid's individual needs and goals. And I just wanted to emphasize this, given that children in correctional facilities often face obstacles to post-secondary success, employment, and independence, in part because of their involvement in the justice system and their contact with the justice system. And so transition plans are really an important opportunity to look at the child's goals and really develop some skills that can help lead to success in adulthood. And with that, I will turn it over to Sean Addy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this briefing today. My name is Sean Addy, and I'm in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, or OCTE, and I serve as the Director in the Office of Correctional Education. On this slide, you can see my contact information. I think it's important to have that out front as well as at the end, just so if there's any follow-up questions or if there's something that pops up in your head a week down the road, you have my contact information and you can reach out and talk to me. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk today about two OCTE projects which intersect with the work that everyone else on this call is involved with. The first is the Young Adult Diversion Project. This was a 3-year project providing technical assistance to 16 jurisdictions across the country. And this was an interesting project because it was actually done in conjunction with folks from OSEP, RSA, and DOJ. So there was a special education focus as well as a career and technical education focus. And the idea behind this project was using career and technical education as a diversionary mechanism for juveniles or young adults who were involved in the criminal or the juvenile justice system. They would, avoid either at arrest, at prosecution, at sentencing. At some point before someone would be serving a sentence, they'd be diverted out of a system with education as that diversionary tool. You can find out more at the link that's been dropped into the chat about that project. Then the other project I'm going to talk about is the Juvenile Justice Reentry Education Project. And that was a grant program, also done in conjunction with the Department of Justice, working to implement career and technical education inside of juvenile justice facilities in 4 sites across the country. And out of that program, the link also was dropped into the chat. There's a host of tools and resources and case studies and more information on those grantees and how they delivered career and technical education inside of jails and juvenile justice facilities. So again, Sean Addy, Director of Correctional Education in OCTE. My contact information is here. Thank you for the time. Feel free to check out both those links, find out more about those projects, see the resources that we have. And now I will pass it over to the Pennsylvania Department of Education.
Thanks, Sean. Ronnie Russell. I'm an educational consultant at the Patton Harrisburg office. We are the training arm of the Bureau of Special Education. So I'm speaking on behalf of them. And you will see also listed here is Ron Hetrick that will speak after me in regards to data casting, and he will introduce himself. Next slide. So I was asked to speak about Pennsylvania and our juvenile and state adult correctional education services and how we ensure a free, appropriate public education to students with disabilities. So what is being done well? One of our greatest accomplishments, I believe, and this was before my time even, was the Record Center project that began in January of 1993. Students placed in juvenile and adult state institutions, including county prisons, private residential institutions, partial hospitals, residential facilities that are under our Office of Children, Youth, and Families. We are able to help them, if they'd like our help, to retrieve academic records, and they are channeled through the Record Center. So they don't house records, but through our state education agency, they are able to be a pass-through to retrieve records for those facilities. The Record Center ensures quick retrieval of academic records. They function as a single point of contact for retrieving academic records from previous high schools, districts, and private placements, and forward that information within a week, usually week to 2 weeks at the most, to the student's current location. They have encrypted access to the Pennsylvania General Equivalency Diploma database. In addition, they have a point of contact at both the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh School District, which are two of the largest school districts in Pennsylvania. In addition, they have connections in Puerto Rico and beyond. So really a good benefit to Pennsylvania. These virtual connections expedite response time and produce unprecedented results with limited resources. And then something that I'm also part of and our bigger picture team is called the Regional Assessment Support Team. The background of this support team is the Corrections Education Division initiated this formal special education programs and services in the state-operated adult and juvenile facilities in the 1984-85 timeframe with pilot programs. The introduction of the RAS project in 1986 enabled our system-wide implementation and/or delivery of special education programs and services. And then in 1997-98 timeframe, we had what was called the Brian B. lawsuit, which allowed us to begin monitoring the provision of FAPE in county jails and county detention centers. We were tasked with going into every one of those county detention centers and county jails within a 2-year time frame. And speaking to what Curtis spoke to earlier, that collaborative effort between the local education agency and the county prison and county detention center is key, and it's an ongoing effort year to year, and that's where our cyclical monitoring, which I'll talk about in a little bit, comes into also. So beginning with the 2008 school year, with the provisions changes in IDEA for publicly placed children, it allowed us to start to go into our residential facilities that are under the Office of Children, Youth, and Families and other residential sites to ensure that FAPE was happening for our students there. We cyclical monitor the provision of special education services to publicly placed Pennsylvania students in state juvenile, adult correctional facilities every 3 years, as they are not tied to a local education agency or a school district. Whereas our county prisons, county detention, private rehabilitative residential institutes, partial hospitals, and residential treatment centers, we monitor every 6 years as they are tied to a local education agency. We also, as part of our project, assist staff in state juvenile, adult correctional facilities, county prisons, again, county detention centers, the private residential institutes, partial hospitals, and residential facilities to implement state and federal special education regulations and provide technical assistance to staff. Again, we cyclical monitor the state juveniles and state correctionals every 3 years, and then some of our state correctional facilities do not have students with IEPs. However, we still monitor them in case they would get a student that has an IEP, so they know what to do, and we monitor them every 6 years. We assist in state juvenile and adult correctional facilities with student assessments for potential and identified eligible students. Again, we do support our record center to assist with that retrieval of educational records. We coordinate facility level procedures to collect our data systems and child tracking for the state. We also coordinate the provision of related services for service providers such as speech and language for our students that may need that. We provide special education curriculum resources and support. We also support special educators and related staff in each juvenile and adult facility in reviewing and assessment and improvement and renewal of programs to deliver identified exit outcomes. And we also provide support as appropriate for student transition to and from correctional centers. You'll also see on the screen here that our collaborative efforts, our team exists of the Bureau of Special Education, an advisor from there, the Record Center staff, special education consultants like myself, a couple division chiefs from the Department of Corrections, a school psychologist, and a student services associate. In addition to that, something that Ron's going to talk to you about in a few moments is our collaborative effort with our public broadcasting station, WITF, for data casting in county prisons. Next slide. As I said, Ron will be sharing data casting information with you in a few moments. We also have a professional learning community for teachers and principals in state corrections that's going on this school year to attract, prepare, and retain our special education teachers and principals. We also help with presentations like this one for OSEP and ongoing support and professional development at our Corrections Education Association conference throughout the year on topics such as secondary transition, inclusive practices, IDEA refreshers, assessments, just to name a few. Some challenges as listed here are least restrictive environment between remanded students that are remanded to facilities by the courts and or the student being able to leave campus to attend a host school district. We also ensure that student attendance forms are correct and complete between the student accounting system from the host school district and resident school district, and making sure that they're continuously communicating when students are in and out of a facility. And we have basic education circulars with our Department of Education that talk about educational portions of non-educational placements. And lastly, with tracking of credits, we do have a new law in Pennsylvania to rectify this. Act 1 of 2022 promotes a timely high school graduation and facilitates equal access to academics and extracurricular activities, and the removal of systemic barriers for students who experience educational instability as defined by the legislation. And now I'll turn it over to Ron. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. If you can go to the next slide. In the spirit of what Greg mentioned at the beginning about providing equitable access to public education, really our collaboration with the Department of Education was born out of that, using a technology called data casting. And there are some wonderful links and videos that have been placed in the chat, both to a slide deck that has a lot of very technical information and user interface information about this technology, but also a little bit about how it works. So I won't bore you to death with that right now. But just know that public broadcasters have the ability to send data in a secure way out to correctional facilities in a way that is not the internet, but actually via a platform that allows for individualized and curated instruction to individual learners, whether that's a youth or adult. And we've had some great success with this in the county prison space here in Pennsylvania, and are looking at expanding it even beyond that. But a little bit about how it works. We have a cloud platform that the teachers that we work with, the actual educators who are working with the students on a very individualized basis, actually go through and create via a web platform the lessons for the students, and then they are sent out securely to the prison facility. At the prison facility itself, there is an antenna fixed on the outside of the building that then is connected either to an existing computer lab or to existing Wi-Fi tablets. And again, it creates a local Wi-Fi spot so that these educational lessons can be accessed securely and remotely without access to the internet. So it's been a very interesting process. We've learned a lot in these last couple of months that, no prison is alike, and there's a lot of different ways this can be implemented. But what has been resonating with us and our pilots is that the way this has been universally designed, and the way that it actually allows different facilities that have always been using pen and paper, for example, to actually move to digital materials and have access not just to standard packets, but also videos around treatment addiction. We have a lot around career exploration. We have things around GED requirements. And we're actually working to bring more of that online. We're working with some higher ed and technical training institutions to bring on other career and certificate programs for those that may be further along in their career. So very, very exciting time and piloting here happening in Pennsylvania. And we're always happy to engage and think about how this might work in your state. We have public broadcasting partners all around the country who are looking in this space. So if this is something that might make sense in your prisons and your state, please feel free to reach out to us and we can help make those connections. Again, I remind you to look at the platform, the links that we have in the chat there. Again, the video, which kind of explains the technology, and then the slide deck, which kind of gives a much deeper technical understanding of what we are just talking about right now, should be of great use. So with that, if you go to the next slide, turn it over to our friends in Michigan.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Ronnie. That is some pretty incredible stuff you're doing, so thank you for that. I am Rebecca McIntyre. I'm the Assistant Director of Special Education in the Michigan Department of Education. And with me today, I have Beth Cook, and she is one of our education consultants in the Department of Education. And we are going to, if you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. We're going to start you off with a visual tour of a journey that we took. Our journey lasted for about a year, but has turned into an adventure for almost the past 3 years now. You can see back in November of 2019, we started receiving a series of complaints from a local advocate. And by February 2020, we had received our 9th complaint. And so our team at the department hopped into action. Beth was the leader of our team. We had an enormous team of 3 that engaged in some very important work. We right away wanted to get information out to our intermediate school districts. So we got in the habit of providing monthly updates on the actual issue. We found that this was a statewide issue, that this advocate had been calling around to all of the jails and all of the intermediate school districts around the state to ask, do you have special education in your jails? And she was told most often that there was no special education provided and they didn't do child find. So Beth and her team started off doing some research, and they recommended that we pull together a team of stakeholders. And those stakeholders they met bi-weekly, and they consisted of intermediate school district staff, local school district staff. We had jail administrators, sheriffs, our adult education colleagues, and then some staff within the Michigan Department of Education looking at funding and special education. So we had quite a diverse group that we got together, we heard perspectives, and eventually in August of 2020, we released a statewide or state level guidance document specific to FAPE in the county jails. Since that time, we continue to engage in this work. We have been providing state level and national level presentations to build awareness. And we continue to provide monthly updates to our ISD directors and providing some individual technical assistance to them as well, so that they can build their systems and ask us any questions, and we can support in any way that we can. We continue to evaluate our systems and the support that we are providing to those intermediate school districts. Beth has released a couple of different surveys to see where different districts and ISDs are at in the development of their systems and what types of support they need from our office. So go ahead and go on to the next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about Michigan. Michigan, we have a law, Michigan Mandatory Special Education. It's mandated special education for children, students, and youth birth to 26 years of age. We have 211,000 children and students with disabilities. We have 56 intermediate school districts and 828 local school districts that fall within those ISDs. And around the state, we have 82 county jails. So during the work that we did, our focus was exclusively on county jails. We did not look at corrections. We did not look at juvenile justice. It was specifically looking at county jails. And we found that there were no laws in Michigan or rules that were related to providing special education or education in county jails, and that there was minimal guidance in any form throughout Michigan. We did find a half a page set of procedures that were developed in 2008, but did not seem to be implemented. So that was about the extent of our fact finding there. Go ahead and go on to the next page. So from the beginning, we were very committed to this work. We had received phone calls through our information line. So we knew what was coming our way. So we were very committed to that work. We placed a priority on understanding the issue from a variety of perspectives. So remember, we have those 82 jails and 56 ISDs and 800 plus local school districts. And so we have an upper peninsula and lower peninsula, and we have the rural, urban, and suburban. We have counties that border on 3 different states. And so there's a lot of diversity around our state. And so we needed to get to understand those different perspectives and have the different perspectives understand each other, because the jails and the sheriffs have a different focus than they're looking at safety and confinement, where school districts and ISDs are looking at education. So we focused on how do we promote and develop a common understanding for fate for our youth in county jails. Beth, did you want to say anything on that?
Just to reiterate what others have said about that relationship between the jail administrators and the local education providers, we have found spending a lot of time on that has been key to some successful programs in the jails.
Okay. Go on to the next slide, please. Right, so we'll talk about some of the challenges to our work, and biggest challenge being that we were lacking systems, right? There were lack of policies, lack of systems. So I want to just jump right to the bottom of the page and look at this quote, being students' confinement is an opportunity for ISDs to engage in rich collaboration with county jails to impact the trajectory of a student's life. So that's what we're looking at. Students were at the heart of the work the whole entire time. If we have any fans of Simon Sinek out there and his golden circle, the students were the why. Okay, they were the why for this work. And our work involved collaborations of all those diverse sets of thinking who were coming in at different starting points. So there were different assumptions that during our conversations came out that we had to talk about, work through, and during that time, trust was built, relationships were developed, and we had buy-in. We had that diverse group of stakeholders who wanted to come together and understand this in order to be able to ensure a free, appropriate public education for youth in county jails. All right, go on to the next slide. So what was our role? What's being done well? So throughout our journey, I can say that MDE, we did not force work on any intermediate school districts, local districts, or county jails or sheriffs. And we did not build a system for them. We facilitated understanding, we facilitated relationship building, and we facilitated visioning and development of systems. So we developed guidance. I had shared back in August of 20, we released that. And that guidance was to be used as a tool for intermediate school districts or the local districts to take to their county jails and have those conversations. This is the why, and this is what we need to do. And then they work on how to do that together. We promoted unique systems based on their county demographics. I shared how diverse of a state we are, as I'm sure all states are, but we allowed for unique systems development by county. We did not impose any one system on them. We continued to foster partnerships and relationships. We are still doing that to today, and we do provide individual technical assistance. Go ahead on to the next slide. And then lastly, moving forward, what do we need to do? Well, listening to this entire presentation today, I wish we would have known back in 2019 what we know today. There are some great resources that are available in technical assistance centers. And so just hearing all of that available and the things that Pennsylvania are doing are great. And so being able to engage in work related to juvenile justice, so expanding our work, adult education, expanding our work that way. We found that during these state complaint investigations that the jails all had adult education. It was that adult education piece where there needs to be some more understanding and awareness of the requirements of IDEA. And then developing a monitoring activity to ensure child find and fate, kind of like what Pennsylvania has done. And I think that's all that we have. We're ready to turn it over to Naomi, Executive Director for Coalition for Juvenile Justice.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. My name is Naomi Smoot-Evans. I'm Executive Director at the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. Next slide, please. We're a national nonprofit that's been around for nearly 40 years, and our main work focuses on helping state advisory groups across the country. Those are governor-appointed bodies in each state and territory that carry out federal laws related to juvenile justice, and particularly the JJDPA, the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. Many of you may be familiar with that law. When it was reauthorized in 2018, it included some new provisions related to ensuring continuity between educational placements and detention facilities back to the home school, and required those credits, like Curtis mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, to transfer so that young folks don't feel like they're wasting time while they're in a facility. I think we have one more slide. I'm going to try to keep it quick so you guys have some time for question and answers. Things that we've seen in terms of challenges and opportunities. So since 2019, detention facilities have had a dramatic decrease in terms of folks coming through the doors to go inside. That's fantastic. We're hoping that that continues. Some of the early data is showing that detention rates are actually starting to head back up to where they were before the pandemic, as judges start to sort of rethink some of the limitations they'd put in to mitigate COVID. But in that process, one thing that hasn't changed, that stayed pretty constant, is a lack of staff, a lack of folks help staff. I mean, everything from cafeterias to living units and pods that folks are living on, to educators who are going into facilities, other program staff that are in facilities. The list goes on, right? We're seeing this in nearly every professional setting across the country. There's a shortage of folks who are available to do the work. What that's meant for our young folks, as we talked about earlier, is more folks being placed in lockdown, more folks being placed in requirements that they're in their cell more often, and less access to educational opportunity. While that is, in the short term, a very serious challenge, that I would encourage you all to think through creatively how we overcome that. In the short term, I think there's an opportunity there. If the folks who were not previously our detention staff aren't available, there's an opportunity there to hire new staff, to look at new qualifications, and maybe turn to an opportunity to have more therapeutic-based employees, more folks who have a background in counseling and those sort of services, so that we have new and different folks in those positions, and in some cases folks who may be able to better serve the young people who are there. And that, I think, is the end of my slides, and I'm going to give us some time for Q&A. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Greg.
Thank you so much. I really was very impressed with the things that I heard our presenters explore for us this evening. Thanks to everybody who has hung in there. It looks like most of our audience has stayed in for the full, well, I guess, for about 80 minutes now. We don't have many questions. The first one is from Jessica Gingold. And she asks, can you speak to the responsibilities of the detention centers, prisons themselves under IDEA? Does FAPE requirement apply to both LEA and the facility itself? And then she puts parenthetically, I'm thinking about situations when the school district says they're trying to educate kids in a detention center, but the facility is not permitting it. I'll start off trying to answer that from the federal perspective. The state is the grantee. They are responsible for ensuring that all eligible children with disabilities receive FAPE. The particular arrangements particularly for children with disabilities in county jails or other correctional facilities, is really left up to the state to determine. We heard our friends from Michigan talk about in Michigan, it's the responsibility of each of the intermediate school districts to determine, who has responsibility for the actual education of children with disabilities in detention centers. I'm not sure about Pennsylvania. Are the folks from Pennsylvania still on? Do you want to talk about what the arrangement is in Pennsylvania? You're still with us?
So in Pennsylvania, it's exactly the LEA, and that's why we have a basic education circular called 1306.2. And it became more defined after that Brian B. lawsuit in the 1997-98 timeframe. And the local education agency is on the docket to ensure that those services are happening. And it goes back to everything I've heard here this afternoon about that collaborative effort when an LEA walks into a prison or detention center and having an ongoing relationship with the education director, the warden, et cetera, to ensure that on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, that the local education agency is aware of what students are there under the age of 21, and that they are able to get in the door and provide what they need to.
So if the LEA has a detention center within its geographical boundaries, it is responsible for the children with disabilities detained there. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that. So it is somewhat individualized for each state, but the bottom line is the state has to ensure that everybody who is eligible receives a free appropriate public education. Jessica also asked later on, is the self-assessment tool available online? And I believe it is. Curtis, could you help with that? Where is the
Yes, it is available. It is available online. Just if you look at the resource slide, we have the link there. It's look on the IDEA, then look on the topic areas on our website, and also it's on the slide as well. So you can look at it once it's posted.
Okay, thank you. And then I think we're almost at time. Real quickly, one last question. Sam Coe is asking, how about for re-entry concerns? The community K through 12 schools hesitating or preventing the exiting students from enrolling and attending the community K through 12 schools. I know that is a huge problem. I don't know if there's anybody like from the state perspective who wants to speak to that. it's probably something that would deserve a whole nother technical assistance call, because that is a real concern. I want to thank everybody. I know we're at time who presented today, for thinking about or sharing with us all the good work that you're doing. I think it really points out that it does take coordination, it does take collaboration. And I wanted to kind of close with something I heard at the end of the presentations, which is that you know, we're provided with an opportunity to impact the trajectory of a student's life. And that's a really important thing to remember, because, you know, ultimately these incarcerated students with disabilities are going to be turned back to the community. So we want to make sure that when that happens, they're in the best possible situation for success, both within their future education as well as their lives as adults. Thank you again. I think we're going to close our call now. I hope everybody has a great day.